Aleksandre Topuria, the forgotten brother. Everyone knows Ilia Topuria, the UFC featherweight champion, is making waves, taking names, and looking like he's ready to take the crown in the division up north at 155 pounds. But behind every champion, there's often a story we don't see. They say behind every successful man lies a stronger woman. Alas, in the case of the UFC champ, it's his elder brother. Meet Aleksandre Topuria, the unsung hero behind the phenomenon we know as El Matador. Now, it might be surprising, but the elder Topuria indeed put his career on pause to help his brother chase greatness. Last weekend, we saw him enter the UFC octagon finally and then take a big win on his debut at UFC 12. Still, to the majority, he's an unknown entity to the game. So we track him to find out who Alexander is and why he is so damn important in the bigger picture of the Topuria family's MMA journey. And finally, what lies ahead for the future? Let's talk. So the story starts way before UFC 312 when Alexander stepped into the cage for his UFC debut. It all started in Halle, Germany, where Aleksandre Topuria was born on January 28, 1996 to Georgian parents who were refugees from the Russia-occupied region of Abkhazia. At 5'7" tall and competing in the bantamweight division, Topuria has made significant strides in his pro career. His journey from a young enthusiast to a UFC fighter is inspiring and indicative of his dedication to the sport. While Ilia was making waves in the game, Alexander was grinding behind the scenes, playing a key role in his brother's success. Alexander wasn't just some guy in the background, he had obvious potential. But in an incredible act of brotherly love, Alexander made a decision that not many would have had the guts to make. Recognizing the potential and talent of his younger brother Ilia Topuria, Alexander chose to put his professional aspirations on hold to support Ilia's burgeoning career. This selfless act not only strengthened their bond, but also underscored the importance of family in Alexander's life. It's not every day you hear of a fighter who's got this talent, who's ready to make it in the big leagues, has a good streak going on, but decides to step back and play support to somebody else. That takes some real selflessness. Known as El Conquistador, he combines an orthodox striking stance with black belt level proficiency in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, making him effective in stand-up exchanges and ground combat. And then we came to UFC 312, where the world finally got to meet Aleksandre Topuria. This wasn't just any debut, it was supposed to be a rematch of Ilia versus Volkanovski, but this time in the supporting corner. Alexander, the guy who had been in the shadow of his younger brother, stepped in to face Colby Thickness and showed that he's more than just a side character in the Topuria story. In the fight, he knocked down his opponent in the first round. Although the fight wasn't eventful after that first round, he dominated the whole fight and got the nod from the judges. This bout bore striking similarities to his brother's debut in 2020. Displaying a fighting style reminiscent of Ilia, Alexander executed precise attacks and showcased spectacular moves, including a suplex that mirrored his brother's earlier performances. Although we're accustomed to seeing the younger of the Topuria clan knock out his opponents, this wasn't the case today with the older one. And with the name comes the big responsibility of following in the footsteps of the champ, and that debut wasn't exactly the debut he would have hoped for to launch his career in the UFC. But listen, we all have some off days, and this being the first sighting, we can let it slide. And don't forget, he had finished all his opponents before fighting last weekend. Outside the octagon, the Topuria brothers exude charisma, proudly representing both Spain and Georgia. While the journey ahead will be tougher and tougher, his debut has set him on an upward trajectory in the UFC. Let's catch up with some experts' takes on El Conquistador and his game. After the fight, not everyone was on the same page when it came to Alexander's potential. We saw Mighty Mouse giving him props, calling him the real deal, saying he's got the skills to be a top-tier fighter. But then there's Henry Cejudo, who's not exactly sold on Alexander's style. Both are legends in the sport, and let's be real, both are known to give an unfiltered opinion on all things MMA. But Cejudo wasn't fully vibing with Alexander's approach, especially when it comes to his style in the octagon. Take a look at this tweet from Triple C, which reads, "Biggest favorite on the card and fought with zero intensity. Not too impressed by Aleksandre Topuria on his debut. It happens, but the critics will be back for more." Now with the Topurias involved, one thing is clear: wherever they go, you will find their characteristic bravado and confidence that oozes strong vibes all around them. This was evident when we recently saw the Topuria brothers take a lie detector test last year. Among many, there was one peculiar question that came up. This part is pure gold. The question that came up was like, who comes out on top if the two brothers fought? And guess what he said? Without skipping a beat, straight up with no hesitation, I would beat you. The two brothers laughed, and the lie detector operator declared Alexandre was telling the truth, to which Topuria replied, I expect you to have that mentality. I guess that's why they named him El Conquistador, literally meaning the conqueror. Now, that took some serious guts. Imagine the scenes. You're already the older brother who stepped aside for your younger brother to chase glory, and now you're saying you could beat him? People went wild in the comments section. Some laughed it off, others took it seriously, and hey, obviously, some of them had to get a bit uncomfortable, understandably, since they both are poles apart in their careers. The patented Topuria confidence clearly runs deep in the family, as Alexandre proudly declares what is going to be the result if he ever gets into a real cage with El Matador. But does he believe it? Maybe. But honestly, it's just a fun moment that shows how competitive these brothers really are. And you know what? It gets people talking. If there's one thing the Topurias know, it's how to keep the spotlight on themselves, even if it's for something as crazy as this. With all the talks of having fighting Georgian blood in there, we can spot a gaping hole in Alexandre's CV, a hole that screams padded record. For those in the unknown, padding is simply a way for a fighter to fight against not so world-class competition to build a stellar record on paper. At a time when his fighting should have done the talking, it's his MMA record that has generated a lot of doubts about his credibility in the game. Some fans doubt him, not because of his ability, but due to the quality of Alexandre's opponents. Now, I know Alexandre's record doesn't exactly have the most stacked list of opponents early on his CV. If I may be honest, it looks kind of padded. It looks like he is more closely following the Khabib formula, fight a bunch of 0-1, 1-4 tomato cans, then build that hype, get those W's, and start making a name. Folks, don't get mad at me, I'm just stating facts here. First of all, no disrespect to Khabib, but he had a similar CV filled with opponents like that before his UFC run began. Similar to the Dagestani great, Alexandre's opponents have a combined record of 12-32, with one fighter making for 7 of those victories. This doesn't bode well as he gets ready to test himself on the deep UFC bantamweight roster. That might be a strategy. It might not be the best, but it gets you to the top with a shortcut. This raises the question as to how he qualified to be signed with the UFC, but again, this will never be talked about as long as you bring in the wins and the eyeballs. Now here's another spicy take. Alexandre's got the tattoos, and I'm talking about one in particular, one that immediately screams Conor McGregor. Take a look at this side-by-side comparison of Alexandre and Conor, and now you know what we're talking about. I mean, come on, doesn't it look strikingly similar? The spine piece on the back, that tattoo gives major Conor vibes. That tattoo looks identical to McGregor's, going from the top of his neck down his spine. Many fighters before Alexandre have been accused of trying to copy the notorious, however, none have this much of a similarity. We all know fighters like McGregor build their brands around a persona that included more than just skills. They built personalities and created a whole aesthetic for themselves, and I feel Alexandre's doing the same. Maybe he's just trying to bring a little flash to the game with his own twist on it. Now, I'm not mad at him. As they say, imitation is the highest form of flattery. However, Ilia might not be too pleased with this, considering the colourful choice of words exchanged between him and Conor. Either way, it's hard to ignore the McGregor parallels. So, after talking all about Aleksandre Topuria, a potential question on everybody's mind would be, what might be next for him in the UFC? In my opinion, the question should be, is he just going to keep building this big brother helping little brother storyline as he has done previously, or is he about to seriously launch himself into the deep end of the UFC rankings and make some noise of his own? He's already proven he can fight, no question. Now he needs to prove he's more than just the guy in Ilia's shadow. It's probably another win for him, and then he can test it out against a ranked opponent. If he can surpass that, folks, we might be talking about him as a future contender, not just a guy with a padded record. The ceiling of Alexandre is wide open at the moment. We have yet to see much of his talents in the octagon. The more we see, the more we'll be able to judge. But for sure, he's got the skills, the confidence, and of course the name. Now all he needs is the right matchup and the right push, Dana, wink wink. And if all the boxes get checked in the right order, he could be up there with the top contenders in no time. At the end of the day, Aleksandre Topuria is more than just Ilia's brother. He's his own fighter, and don't forget his journey in the UFC is just getting started. So buckle up, we might just be witnessing the start of something huge. Something that has rarely happened in the game. Two brothers at the top of the game simultaneously. It remains to be seen whether Aleksandre Topuria will follow in the footsteps of his brother Ilia and embark on a career that will catapult him into UFC stardom. So, what do you think? Could Alexandre beat Ilia? Where do you see his future in the UFC, and how about his record? Let us know in the comments below, and make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more content in the world of combat sports, and I'll catch you on the next one. But before YouTube pushes you to another video with its algo, take a look at the video on your left, where we try and find out why Georgian wrestling can be the kryptonite of Dagestani wrestling.